One of the biggest bullets I dodged in my short YouTube career was Season 1 of Rings of Power. Considering it was released in September of 2022, it was a boat that had long since left the dock by the time my derpy ass had come strolling along. Which was likely a good thing, since being so green at the time and seeing as how I'm not the biggest Tolkien buff, I wouldn't have been able to properly tear into it the way it truly deserved. But as with all good things, it seems my time at port with this show has officially come to an end. And it's finally time to drop anchor in this cesspool of incompetence. The one thing that had been well documented about this series was just how much it offended the audience. A sentiment I'm all too familiar with. That seriously will never get old. But now that I have at long last plunged my head into the septic tank, I truly understand exactly why so many people were disgusted with this shit. We open up with a flashback to the before times in the long, long ago, or maybe last week, it's hard to tell with this timeline.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
A blonde, perfectly clean soy boy Sauron is attempting to endear himself to the orcs with some good old-fashioned sweet talk.
The Valar will never forgive you. Elves will never accept you. Men will never look upon you with anything but horror and disgust.
After killing one of the most retarded would-be assassins you'll ever see, he is crowned king in place of a freshly dead Morgoth. Or apparently Caesar, as the orcs proceed to gangbang him into submission. After a few swift test kicks from Adar, it's apparent this story has ended before it even began. However, rather than accept his fate, Sauron, who from here forward will be known as Moron,
He's a moron! You know what a moron is?
literally goes nuclear winter on the entire area. But don't worry, because no orcs were harmed in the making of this scene. They all just shrug off a literal atomic blast of frost which vaporized everything around them to see that Moron has vanished. Or has he? Turning into fucking black goo, which is a thing we have never seen before in anything like Prometheus, Stranger Things, The X-Files, Fifth Element,
2 hours later.
Event Horizon, Venom from Spider-Man 3.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
Anyway, he seeps into the rocks below and becomes fucking Swamp Thing or some shit, and slowly crawls his dumb ass across the ice age he caused moments ago.
Papa's a little out of shape.
He then gets run over like goddamn roadkill, or as I like to call it, dinner. Hey, a guy's gotta save money where he can in this economy. He then absorbs some unfortunate drunken hag, thereby gaining a new male body somehow.
I've got a shiny new body.
And has a good cry over a fire because nothing screams powerful evil demigod to an audience more than the opening to an emo music video. As with everything else in this show, it's impossible to tell how long any of this takes or over what distance. This is supposed to be the incredibly lengthy search for Sauron that Galadriel and her brother embark upon, but apparently this could have happened over a few weeks, so none of this makes any sense. Anyway, Moron comes across a group of random people fleeing the orc army. One tells him not to go that way because he'll die and he should join them instead.
It can lead us someplace better, someplace good.
You are alive because you have chosen good.
Taking them up on their offer, he finds himself on a boat with the travelers, which is attacked by the giant penis monster. That has a suspicious lack of spears in its body, by the way. Sinking the boat and leaving him and a few others stranded before encountering Galadriel recreating the scene from the first season. That was all the prologue. 22 minutes and 13 seconds of stupid shit to fill us in on exact circumstances which put a character in his beginning position. Which seemingly is only there to try and explain the crazy random happenstance of how our pro and antagonist stumbled upon each other. But doesn't actually address the fundamental issue of the fact that in the gigantic vast ocean they simply ended up encountering by chance. Contrivances aren't acceptable simply because you say they are and create a half-assed explanation for them. We then cut back to Galadriel and L. Ron Hubbard, racing back to the High King Gilga dumbass as she's attempting to steal the rings back, but can't. She is then questioned on Halbrand's true identity, to which she has some bangers in terms of dialogue.
He is not what I thought. Which is the reason I did what I did. He deceived me. I was deceived.
No, Galadriel.
King Dumbass wants to use the very rings that Moron himself helped forge. But L. Ron Hubbard opts to hurl himself off of a mountain rather than turn the rings over, which somehow represents the greatest display of intelligence between the three elves. Back in Mordor, Moron is taken captive and brought to be a slave under Adar. Moron tries to negotiate with him, but seeing as how he has very little in the way of bargaining power, they promptly beat the piss out of him and throw him in a cage. Shifting gears to definitely not Gandalf, we see him wandering the desert along with Nori. You know, there's a lot of aimless walking in this show.
Who knows? Walking might be fun. Walking stinks.
It's almost like the writing room had a ton of pages to fill and no idea what they wanted to do. Sushi Rice Paper convinces bearded plot device to use magic on a tree to get some fruit, but instead he just turns it into a bomb because he's fucking useless. But that's okay because the stump is full of grubs for them to snack on, which pair nicely with the roadkill from earlier.
Slimy? It's satisfying.
They have one of this show's trademark stellar dialogic exchanges.
Lost control.
So you need to learn how not to lose control. I knew it'd be hard, it's just him. This heart's different.
Which further drives home my assumption that this show is written by children. Still held captive, Moron opts to be beaten with a hammer for some reason, even though he's given a chance to not, and uses parcel tongue to convert a wolf to his side. Just pointing out that this pathetic husk of moody adolescent angst is actually supposed to be this guy.
The Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret.
He shouldn't have to put up with this shit. I get that he's being the great deceiver, but that doesn't require constantly getting your ass kicked. But I guess everyone has their kinks, though.
Oh, I don't know. Don't you think you should spank me or slice my nostril?
Meanwhile, Gilga Dumbass prepares a message for Celebrimbor which warns of Moron's return, before chastising Galadriel Dumb for thinking with the wrong head about Halbrand. They are then informed that the search parties have failed to find L. Ron Hubbard. The reason for this being he has taken up hiding in Lindon, where he has met with Círdan to further discuss the rings. Again. Like, holy fuck, guys. Not every conversation needs to be repeated so often to pad your runtime. Mid-conversation, they are interrupted by the sound of horses of the arriving Galadriel and Gilga Dumbass, because just like every single show nowadays, time and space is only as far and long as the writer requires from scene to scene. Galadriel tries to assure Hubbard that the rings aren't dangerous or evil, but he's convinced she's still craving some evil cock and that she's been corrupted. So he sent the rings away with Círdan to be destroyed in a trench of the Sundering Seas. But after someone farts under the water and moves his ship a bit, he changes his mind and looks at the rings, which despite the appearance of cheap costume jewelry, he decides are perfection and should not be destroyed. Back in the desert, not Gandalf and Rice Paper set up a rope trap so obvious it would embarrass Wile E. Coyote.
It's tough being the boss.
Yet somehow it fucking works despite literally being flat to the ground. Who is retarded enough to fall for this, you ask?
Your language is offensive. Fuck you!
Well, it's Poppy Seed Bagel, Rice Paper's best friend who somehow found them out here in the middle of nowhere. But little do they know that they're being tracked, as together they decipher that the song that is obviously about traveling is in fact about traveling. Moron continues his deception of the orcs and Adar, vowing allegiance to help bring death to himself.
I vow to serve the Lord of Mordor to the end of my days.
Okay. But little does the slave overseer know that a trap has been set with the wolf. Círdan returns and they all decide to have a jewelry party, which does in fact revive the Eldar, making L. Ron Hubbard look like an idiot despite being the only reasonable one so far. And meanwhile, Moron arrives with a message for Celebrimbor before the scene fades to black. Has this economy been hitting you hard? Are you worried you haven't sufficiently saved for retirement? Want to put away enough to assure you'll make it through your golden years? Well, Chief Executive Officer, have I got the solution for you. Using our proven system, we can launder hundreds of millions of dollars away from your big budget productions and funnel it directly into offshore accounts completely off the books. How do you ask? Well, through countless hours of intense research, we here at Shady Hollywood Accounting Inc. have discovered 4 surefire sinkholes that no one can even figure out the finances of in the first place. Catering, reshoots, advertising, and props. That's right, crap. With this 4-step program, we can take any movie that's guaranteed to tank and make sure that you personally break the bank. So before you start filming, give us a call at 1-800-223-3456. That's 1-800-BAD-FILM. And make your next production a crap production. The episode opens up in Khazad-dûm, where we join the dwarven token interracial couple Durin and his wife Disa the elephant.
Oh, will you shut up?
Which is not a reference to her weight, but the fact that she randomly senses an earthquake before it happens. Why she's able to sense this and no one else, including the other stone singers, is beyond me, since they all evolved to be subterranean mountain dwellers.
Black girl magic!
The earthquake is brief, but it takes out their sun shafts, leaving them in the dark. You know, if that's literally your only means of getting sunlight, you'd think you'd have some sort of tectonic failsafe. Meanwhile, Galadriel is having an LSD trip about Celebrimbor being turned into a tree. Though she really should be paying attention to the War Council of Elves considering she's a general, but that's what being a nepotism hire gets you nowadays. Through the ring, she has gained the ability to see the future.
One possible future
From your point of view, I don't know tech stuff.
She voices her concerns over the possibility that Moron has already arrived in Eregion, which he has. And Gilga Dumbass says attack is not possible because of rivers and walls or some shit.
Eregion is protected by 2 rivers with miles of curtain wall of dwarven stone.
He then completely contradicts himself, explaining that the Deceiver can manipulate his way into anyone's mind and make decisions for them. This actually supports Galadriel's theory that rivers and walls don't fucking matter when someone comes knocking at your front door. Speaking of Eregion, Moron gets told to leave but decides to stay and for some reason isn't forced out at Spear Point. Celebrimbor had promised Galadriel that he wouldn't entertain Moron if he returned, but simply doesn't care if he just stands inside the city walls.
I'm just gonna assume it all went to plan. What?
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds.
I guess he's just assuming he'll get bored and leave. No, he'd rather just wait for the messengers from Lindon, who are super dead, by the way.
Message for you, son.
Back in the desert, the masked tracker arrives at Karasgare, which I can only assume is the Elvish translation for Jawa Sandcrawler, cause seriously, look at these things. This is the home of Grigory Rasputin and his butterfly pavilion. Also his acolytes, all of whom are very much interested in not Gandalf for undisclosed reasons. The tracker lets Rasputin know that he will kill Poppy Seed Bagel and Rice Paper in order to bring in the bearded plot device.
Soon the Black Cauldron will be mine.
You know what, let's touch base with our mindless wanderers. Just as expected, they're still meandering aimlessly through the desert, with the halflings attempting to give not Gandalf a name, which may turn into either superfluous information or engaging in a lot of runtime padding, but we'll determine that later. They're closed in on by the trackers, who are somehow able to spot them from great distance, but can't find them when they're hiding under a rock or behind a bush 5 feet away. In order to lose them, Rice Paper, Bagel, and not Gandalf decide to go off trail. Which is funny because I was under the impression they were out in the wilderness where people already don't go. So apparently they need to boldly go where even less than no one has ever gone before. Back in Khazad Dûn, the Stone Singers are talking shit about Prince Durin when Elephant Lady overhears them. She chastises them before going to the king to try and convince him to allow her to do her job and find the light. A task she fails in spectacular fashion. She then decides to try and repair the relationship between the king and the prince by goading both of them into apologizing. Because that's what always fixes families, a nagging wife. Oh, and Prince Durin is also having union disputes, by the way. The elves notice that their pen pals haven't answered back and come to the only obvious conclusion that Moron must be involved. Though honestly, I watched this scene twice and couldn't figure out what happened to the messengers, so it's actually possible that he's not for once. Galadriel wants to seek out Moron, but is only allowed to if she takes Hubbard with her, since King Dumbass believes she's too horny to go alone.
And under his hand I was played like a harp to a melody not of my choosing.
You know, that's a strange way to say you wanted him to flick your bean, but I digress. Hubbard refuses as he'd rather fiddle around with his wood. Torn over his decision to smooth his lumber,
I got pages of these, I could go on.
He approaches a freshly shaven Círdan, which has apparently triggered many die-hard Tolkien fans, and I'm not exactly sure why, so perhaps someone could tell me in the comments. Anyway, they have a spirited discussion about how the rings shouldn't be represented by their designer and how one should separate the art from the artist. Which is a great discussion to have over a song that was written by someone who robbed a liquor store as a teenager, but not usually for possible weapons of genocide connected to megalomaniac dictators. Based on his unique point of view here, do you think maybe Círdan has a copy of Mein Kampf stashed behind his questionable magazines of suggestively posed hobbits?
Lewd renderings of naked serving wenches.
I have needs, woman.
Back in the Endless Desert, again, not Gandalf passes out due to dehydration after dragging Bagel and Rice Paper's lazy asses across the sand. Bagel takes off running, seemingly leaving her friends to die.
I saw it, I know I saw it, come on! See what? Water!
Wait a minute, you're telling me while you were dying of thirst you saw a fucking well and decided to not mention it to anyone? Seriously? What the fuck is this? Who approved this scene? How can anyone sit down and say, yeah, that makes sense in the word assembly process? I guess we'll just chalk it up to this as your Season 2 reminder that Harfoots are sociopathic assholes. Oh, and the well happens to be equipped with a plot progressing "We're the fuck over here" bell, which gets triggered, and the staff from Not Gandalf's Dream. Is this the fabled well of abundant plot conveniences or something? Oh, and of course the trackers are close enough to find them within 30 seconds as well, despite them choosing the dumbest possible path so no one would follow them. This is a fantastic example of the script only being as smart as the word assemblers, and in this case we're dealing with ones that have IQs somewhere in the low 60s. Not Gandalf summons up a sandstorm which kills the trackers and blows away his half-brained partners as he's unable to stop it. Who could have saw that coming?
I lost control.
In Eregion, Celebrimboob notices that Moron is still there and finally decides to remove him by force, going down to deal with him personally. Well, that shit took long enough. He's promptly tricked into allowing Moron to stay through the clever usage of vagary.
She said you'd say that. Galadriel, you have spoken with her.
Truly, this is the most brilliant of the elves. Further driven home as Moron proceeds to take the form of Anatar the Gift Giver to convince Celebrimboob it is his destiny to create more rings to save all the realms and become
The Lord of the Rings.
Are you saying boo or boo-earns?
Moral of the story, when a guy you were told to not trust proves that he can randomly change his appearance, you should definitely follow him blindly. Back at the small council of mentally deficient elves, Gilga Dumbass summons Galadriel to inform her that Hubbard is randomly now in charge. This despite the numerous demotion threats, and the episode fades to black. Good, maybe some shit will actually get done in this show now that a man is in charge.
That is so sexist.
You know, considering Amazon has sunk well over $1 billion into this project, you'd think that its production value would be top-notch. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Whether it be the cheap-looking props, horrible sound mixing, or directionless script, it seems that no stone was left unturned in regards to getting the worst possible return on investment. Lord of the Rings was made 20 years prior, yet there's a severe downgrade in the quality of nearly everything. Considering the sheer amount of money spent on this thing, the props are bad. Let's just accept that fact and move on. However, it's called Lord of the Rings of Power. So what the fuck is up with these goddamn rings? Here are the prop rings from Fellowship. Note the clarity and luster. These are a dignified design, exuding a somber strength. The type of ring you'd bring home to mom. By comparison, look at these pieces of shit. These are cheap, gaudy, placing emphasis on the size of the stone and not the quality of its character. This is ghetto-ass jewelry. The type of thing you'd buy at a flea market in hopes of tricking someone with poor eyesight into believing you have money. However, anyone with the slightest degree of taste would be able to sniff out this white trash chic, which is unfortunately the design that they went with for their billion-dollar production.
Hell no!
I feel that it's becoming a running gag in Hollywood that sound mixing is just terrible across the board. I personally am all for giving people with disabilities a chance, but perhaps we should keep the hard of hearing out of the audio department? I often get the sense that I myself am slowly going deaf because I can never seem to understand any of the dialogue in anything anymore. But Rings of Power might be the worst culprit yet. Not only do the conversations suffer from poor blending, but their need to enhance every squelchy noise is completely over the top. It's as if every single stab is right next to a lavalier mic on full gain. I mean, listen to this compared to this. I could overlook all of this if the script surrounding it was a polished gem that shined bright enough to blind me to the other issues. But that is not the case at all. The word assembly here is a ship without a rudder. It's rather fitting that one of the plot points is a group lost in the desert because that's what the narrative feels like. My best guess is that Poppy and Nori are self-insert characters, as they personify everything that's wrong with the way this show is written. Vapid, bargain bin, and without direction. Rings of Power is the boat that I missed the maiden voyage of, but somehow it made it back to shore, and unfortunately for me, my ticket is still valid. So let's all strap in for the ride, because it's gonna be a long one. And maybe if we're lucky, this time it'll capsize. And if that's not enough to convince you that I'm not really looking forward to the next 5 weeks or so, I'm not sure anything I could possibly say would do the trick.